Okay, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. I think there's participants all around the world. That's great. Thank you very much for participating in this webinar organized by the Chicago Booth Alumni Club of France in partnership with the Corporate Finance Committee of France Biotech, which is the French Biotech, MedTech, and eHealth Association. First of all, I would like to say a few words on France Biotech and the University of Chicago. Yeah. So first, for France Biotech, so this is the French Association of Innovative Health Tech Company. So who are we? Basically, we have been founded in 97. We're about 300 members, biotech, medtech, and e-health, and 20 entrepreneurs are on the board of France Biotech. We have various missions. The first mission is to bring together entrepreneurs in health tech, so biotech, medtech, e-health, and their expert partner, to improve the tax, the legal, regulatory, and managerial environment for businesses, which is very important, and to support the development of this industry in France, in Europe and abroad, and to transform our startup and SMEs into successful and global organization. I'm sure Sophie will give us some hint about that. Regarding the policies and achievements, at France Biotech, we have the origin of what we call the Young Innovative Company status, giving an advantage for the startup with taxes. France Biotech advocates for the innovative health sector and being recognized as a leading edge industry here in France and in Europe, and regularly contributes to public and innovation issues. I have some issues with my, sorry about that. Yes. So in France Biotech, actually, we have 9 committees. I'm not going to go through all of those committees, but you see they address all the issues here in France and in Europe and in the world about biotech, medtech, and e-health. We have also 3 working groups for technology transfer, clinical trials, and market access. Just a couple of words on Health Tech Investor Innovation Day here. So France Biotech a few months ago has funded an endowment fund, and this endowment fund name is Health Tech for Care. And based on the success of last year, we will reconvene this event in Paris in October 5 and 6. And this event is, I would say, unique in Europe. All our friends from the US or other countries are welcome, especially the investors. We have individual meetings, we have conferences and thematics roundtable, discussion and networking. You can have access to through the website to the last year events. And this event is organized for biotech companies, medtech companies, companies offering innovative services and functionalities, and of course, digital health companies. A few words on the University of Chicago Booth School of Business. There's 3 campuses, one in Chicago, one in London, and one in Hong Kong. This University of Chicago has been founded in 1819. And one thing which is actually quite powerful is that Rockefeller in 1997 said that his contribution to this university was the best investment he ever made in his life. It is the 2nd oldest business school in the US. There's around 30 plus Nobel laureates in economic sciences that are associated with the University of Chicago, including 9 scholars for Chicago Booth. So 3 of them are currently teaching at Chicago Booth, Eugene Pharma, Lars Peter Hansen, and Richard Taylor. There's around 54K Chicago Booth alumni globally, and regarding the Nobel laureates, it's more than 90 plus within the University of Chicago. A few words on the brand new Chicago Booth London campus. So this new campus, you have the picture here. It's the ground, the first and second floor are occupied by the University of Chicago booth. This is a private entrance to the school. Here you have the Wall of Fame with all the Nobel laureates. And the school at the university is located at a strategic location in London, just near the Smithfield Market. So this being said, it is my great pleasure to welcome today Sophie Kornowski, who is senior partner at Gurnet Point Capital in Boston. Sophie joined Gurnet Point Capital in 2018 from Roche when she was executive vice president of Roche Partnering. In that role, she focused on establishing external partnership with biotechnology and research institutions worldwide for Roche. She was also a member of Roche's extended global executive committee. Sophie and her team completed over 50 deals per year in her role as head of partnership at Roche. And previously, she led Roche's major affiliate for 5 years in France. She also spent 11 years in various leadership roles at Merck in the United States, France, and Israel. She spent the early years of her career at Abbott and Sanofi in France and the US. So Sophie has an MBA from the University of Chicago Booth and a PhD in pharmacy from Paris Descartes University. So during the webinar, Sophie will walk us through the intricacies of the deal in pharma, biotech, PE, private equity, and venture capital. Sophie, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Pierre. Can you see me? Can you see the slides? Everything is good?
Yes, everything's okay.
Okay, great. Hello, everyone. Thank you for taking the time. I'm excited to be here today, and I'm excited to help Pierre in his mission for biotech in France and around the world. I think, Pierre, you're doing an amazing job. I'm going to tell you a little bit about deals in general, and that should be very much of a dialogue, even though right now I feel a little lonely in my office with my computer. So let me take you to talk about the industry and the biotech, and I will not talk so much about the pandemic, even though I think that there is a lot to learn. First of all, I think it's obviously a human and healthcare and economic terrible adventure that we're going through. But at the same time, we have to realize that the way the industry has shown up with more than 200 clinical trials and vaccines that are going to read in the next few months, and the industry partnering among itself like it has never done before with government across geographies is quite remarkable. And it also reminds us that when healthcare drama happen, the industry plays an absolute key role. And I think I will welcome any question on that front. And I just want to talk about it a little later. But it's been just very challenging, I think, for all of us to continue being focused on our mission, on our jobs. And I think in the world of deal making, I would say that it is possible to continue doing deals even though you are very remote. I'm just not so sure it's easy to create new relationships. So that will be a good point of discussion as well. So I have had a very interesting and in many ways very lucky career, because I've met some really great people. I'm sure many of you can recognize various CEOs of big pharma, be it Severin Schwan or Pascal Soriot or Chris Liebacher. Miles White is quite in the middle because he was key in my getting into University of Chicago, and my first adventure was before University of Chicago with Abbott and after University of Chicago with Abbott as well. So I'm very grateful of what I've been able to accomplish around the university that we all share deep love for. So it's always, I think, really important when we work in healthcare to remind ourselves why we are here. There is an enormous amount of disease that are not untackled yet, that are not yet tackled. I believe it's about, every year 8 million people die from cancer. It's 1.5 million of new cases every year. Infectious disease, we have seen on drug-resistant bacteria, the way that it causes the toll and the death number that is enormous. And you can see also here a few other points. However, I was reading recently that the rate of death from cancer has decreased by 27% in the past more than 20 years. And we know, all of us know that today, if you have breast cancer, certain type of breast cancer, or certain type of lung or melanoma, the chances of long survival, if not a cure, is existing. And it is remarkable, and this is why we continue to do our effort to find new products and find the best way to develop them and to get them to patients. So every day when I wake up, I hope I make a difference, and I do hope every one of you in this industry feels the exact same way. What is very exciting is that you actually have a ton of people looking for innovation. We tend to think when we're in a big company like Roche, where you have 100,000 people, why, we have everybody smart here and everybody will find a solution. But actually you have 5.8 million scientists around the world, and you have a very important number of them, and very brilliant number of them in the pharma companies, but you also have them in universities, in small startups. And when you imagine that you can have everybody working together, you really can get to the very best of this. And we've seen actually that a couple of the leading vaccines that are in the work right now for COVID, the AstraZeneca as well as the one from the Chinese company, are coming from universities. So this is CanSino Bio, I think. So this is very exciting as well. And continuing the dialogue with universities is really important for the pharma industry. So very robust deal counts, and deal making is very intense. Those data are a little bit outdated. This is a challenge when you go from working for a big company where you have a ton of communication people and going to a private equity fund where you are yourself, and maybe yourself again. But what has been very interesting to look is that there's been an enormous activity in M&A in the last year. I think it's 254 billion have been invested through the various deals. You have, even since COVID, you have 14 funds that have raised over 10 billion, healthcare funds, and you continue to have very healthy Series A. I have to say the rounds seem to be a little bit smaller, closer to the 25 million, as opposed to some of the mega rounds we saw in the previous year. And IPOs have been also really up to expectations in the beginning of the year. Now we don't know what will happen as the year continues. Everybody talks about the second wave and the fact that we're probably living with this virus for another 12 to 15 months before a vaccine is available. So we can imagine that the buoyant activity may not continue to be so buoyant, but I would be the last one to say that I have a crystal ball at home that I have been satisfied with. In terms of the type of deals that we're seeing, or the interest for deal making, it continues to be very much of an early stage market. People have experienced that when you go into late stage deal making, oftentimes you get surprises that cannot be positive, because biotech may have taken shortcuts into developing drugs, not because by desire, but also because it takes a lot of resources to go, for example, into the manufacturing scale up. So early stage, very active, and late stage, a bit less active. And actually the premiums have been remarkable. The industry has been seeing a very robust NASDAQ, and then the premiums paid for early stage are in the 100%, as we have all seen. I would say the correction is not on the way yet. When you look at what are the exciting innovation, where is it coming from? FDA surveys show you that actually more than half of what is either a breakthrough designation or priority review generally comes from academia and biotech. So clearly it continues to be a very important source of innovation. What is very interesting is you could think, okay, but now you have those big pharma, they really need to deliver on their promise for R&D with all the tens of billions that are being invested by many of the companies. So this is a very interesting chart because it shows a success rate of various companies. They are blinded, but you can see them. And what this chart is showing is that 2 time period that is showing that a very successful company in a time frame has not necessarily been able to sustain its performance. And this is also the experience I have personally. I have worked at Merck at the time, you know, in the 90s. Merck had a remarkable innovation. We launched many drugs every year, and this was a darling of many investors. Then there was a dip in the pipeline, not only following the COX-IBs, but also a bunch of drugs that failed in the pipeline for Alzheimer, notably already back then. And now we have this amazing Keytruda, which has just amazed the market and the physicians and the patients. And at Roche, the strategy has been very interesting to keep the research going. As some of you may know, Roche has actually 3 centers of research. It has Roche Research. It has a Genentech Research, which is completely independent based on the West Coast. And it has Chugai, which is the Japanese company for Roche. And those research operate independently. They come together at the time of entry into late stage development. And this has allowed the pipeline of Roche to be full in a more continuous way than many other companies. So when you look at this, it makes you very humble. I remember when I took the job as head of partnering in Roche, some people came to me and told me, that's a stupid job. Why did you take that? You guys have a full pipeline. And I was like, oh, okay, maybe I made the wrong choice, but I'm curious to learn. And within 6 months, we had dalcetrapib, vitropertin, taspoglutide, and there was a fourth one that the name escapes me, that all failed, which was basically the future of Roche. And that just determined that I had a lot on my plate, which I enjoyed immensely. This is a chart showing you the contribution of external innovation, emerging companies into late stage pipelines. And you see that we can, it depends from which company, but in general, external innovation accounts for 50 to 70% of the R&D pipeline. And a very famous company, Celgene, had an early in its life, a pipeline for multiple myeloma that was very impressive. But then everything else that was developed came from external innovation with a very aggressive deal strategy. So, we all come from Chicago, so we love numbers and we love forecasting, and we really can get really high on the model. And I can tell you, in the world of private equity, you do get really high on Excel model. But here, this is a forecast of various drugs and how well they delivered versus the forecast. And it will be quite remarkable for you to notice that the large majority of very, very visible drugs were way off their forecasts. And I like this chart because it also reminds you, and if you look at the name between Imbruvica, Gilenya, Sovaldi, which is just a remarkable drug, Incivec, and Eliquis even, it really reminds you that you have to be very careful when you do a forecast, and you have to be very careful. We learn in Chicago that decisions have to be made on numbers. And for sure, when you do business development, all your story and your adventure is going to be a number. But you have to really understand how you get to this number and build error bars around it, and really understand the assumptions and be able to play with assumptions. Otherwise, you may really pass on the remarkable products. I think a lot of companies passed on Lipitor, actually, for probably that reason. So again, a reason to be humble. So what do we think first when we want to go and do a deal? We think about best in class, a new mechanism of action. Okay, if it's not best in class, at least best in disease. First in class is even better. I have personally a true passion for first in class and a lot of suspicion for best in class. But oftentimes, this is not exactly what comes to your desk. So you say, okay, but there is a strategic fit, or it's going to be fast to the market, or it will be a great bolt-on, or maybe it's the best follow-on that I can think of. And every now and then you're like, okay, this is the only thing I was able to push through this committee, or after forecasting until the cows came home, this is the only thing that got me a positive NPV. And I think it shows that you know, any one of you guys who's doing deals, doing a deal is close to a miracle. And even though I did 50 to 60 deals every year for 7 years in my role at Roche, I have to say every time we really went through hoops and loops, and so, you know, the finish line isn't easy to get to. But on the other hand, I think you have to also be equally excellent at stopping a deal. If the strategic fit is not there, if the valuation makes no sense, or if the partner is misbehaving even before you actually are signing the deal. So it's really interesting to think about the patient, to think about the commercial case, and to think about the people adventure that will happen once you sign a deal. So you want a tailored deal, you want to be flexible. So, you know, a win-win deal, that is the best that you can think of, where the partner will learn something from the company, there will be a reasonable sharing of the value, the constraints that will be imposed on the two parties will be limited, and you've been able to, as much as possible, not front load the financials and the risk. Oftentimes, the information you have through due diligence is solid, but the discoveries post due diligence are major. And you have to always remember that when you sign a deal with a company, you should assume the innovation will fail, because this is what R&D is all about, and you should not be blushing on the terms you got to or the agreement you have arrived at. So, you know, that the deal structure is incredibly important, and my strategy has always been early on to agree with the company more or less on what are we talking about, because if you want to license and they want to sell, it's a waste of time to waste their time, actually. And oftentimes companies are smaller than the big ones, or if you're in a small company, you don't have time to interact with 200 people in the big company, which can be what you have to go through to get a deal done. So understanding what can be the realm of possibilities is extremely important. So I had to put this because I am now a bit late. I recognize I'm reading Misbehaving, and I just think this book is amazing for having negotiated so many deals, so many years. So I just recently we were talking in my fund about what we have to do on one of our companies, and I just had to quote this sentence from Richard Thaler about the importance of fairness. There is oftentimes a sense that you know, let's start the deal by a lowball offer, or let's put on the table something really aggressive, and then this will be the start of the negotiation. And I actually find it fascinating that some of the reactions that exist early on or later on during the negotiation can truly damage, first of all, the possibility to do the deal, but possibly even the relationship between people after a deal is done. And I just had to acknowledge the intelligence of behavioral economics and how much it has it's been part of how I operate in deal making, but I didn't know it was a behavioral economics. So I'll be very happy to discuss this if we have a chance at the end. Thank you, Richard. I hope I get a chance to meet you sometime. So the key to making a deal in pharma is or for biotech, first you have to have good people who can understand the data on the side of the pharma, because they have to be able to read through the innovation, and on the side of the biotech, because if the biotech has done something great, then probably the people are going to be great. And if that's not the case, then probably you have to be very careful in the discussion. The data is extremely key. Oftentimes, when something goes wrong, you realize you misunderstood a piece of data, or you were missing a piece of data, or the FDA realized that something was missing and you didn't realize it was missing. Spending a lot of time on the data and not being shy to dig yourself is important. Then you have to be very rigorous in the decision making. So let's be clear, when it's deal time, everybody falls in love. If the deal heat happens, you've been working on this for first a week, then a month, then 3 months, then 6 months, and if it's a late stage deal, it can be a year. And judgment can be really blurred. And I highly recommend that you are very rigorous in the way you look at something and don't start changing your criteria that would blur the overall judgment on a deal. There has to be a process for decision. I like the idea that the deal maker is not the decision maker, and that the internal customer is going to have to do a trade-off on his budget. This is the best way to make sure that the goals are aligned and that the evaluation of the innovation is better than what exists internally. So that increases the chances of a deal happening. And it has to make sense on strategy. Actually, if you're off strategy, most likely you have people who don't understand what they're looking at. They probably are not looking at the right data, and you can be sure it's not going to be a good process for decision with a proper rigor. So all of this comes together, and in that case, you have a chance to do well. In any deal, you have, I think in a big pharma, maybe 10 committees to go to. So people complain a lot, oh, these committees, they are so painful. But I think every year we can read in the press, not long ago, a company, I don't want to name that company, had $2 billion write-off, I think, on the deal they did with a company I actually really like, but the drug didn't work. I mean, the FDA didn't like what they saw in terms of safety. And you know, when this happens, you want to make sure that you follow the good process, because the feeling is quite, you know, dramatic. So, you know, when all goes well, it's fantastic. But as I said, oftentimes things do not go well. So you want to make sure that you are, you know, very comfortable with the way you worked, the transparency and the dialogue you had all around the deal making. So I had to talk about this as well, because coronavirus has triggered all this activity. And then my dear colleague, Dan O'Day, CEO of Gilead, who was the head of Pharma when I was at Roche, so he was one of my key customers, has taken a very bold move by identifying early on that maybe remdesivir could work against COVID. His chief medical officer actually was a key person in Roche, so a very respectable individual as well. So they early on designed the clinical trial to prove this, and after they had a hint that this was going to be the case, they created you know, tens of partnerships to be able to supply the market as soon as possible. And I find this remarkable because there was a large risk taking, but what I find more remarkable is that if you had remdesivir come on your desk, oh, why don't we in-license remdesivir? It may work against some coronavirus, that it could happen one day that there would be pandemic with coronavirus, which is, by the way, what all scientists have always said. I can only imagine the conversation around the forecast of remdesivir and the pricing of remdesivir and how we're going to do the manufacturing of that drug. And you would have never gotten a deal done. As you know, at Roche, we had Tamiflu. We in-licensed Xofluza for flu. I tried to in-license a drug for RSV. Eventually, it failed, but it also failed that I wasn't able to get the deal through. And it's also the case of let's always remind ourselves what impact can a drug have if the case is that this drug is needed. And in the case of a pandemic, you can see that this is transformational. So, you know, whenever you're in the middle of a deal and you cannot get the forecast right and people are telling you, but I mean, how do you know, and how can you be sure of this and how can you be sure of that? You know, go back to pandemics, for example, this one, because we had the flu in 2009 and it was also pretty dramatic. So just it's a good exercise to realize that it's not always forecasting and paper and going back to publication that will get you the sense that there's things that the industry needs to step up against or for. Just a few words. I was lucky enough to be part of the adventure of Roche going into the world of data. Back then, the executive committee was wondering, okay, there is all this data being generated. This is part of discussion that we were having, and what should we be doing with all this data? Can it have an impact on patient care? And you remember Roche has a diagnostic and a pharma division. So this made a lot of sense to start talking about, is there something we should be doing with data? And Roche developed this thinking, which my team was instrumental, because we then had to execute in terms of partnership, going from, you have the R&D, then you develop the clinical trial, outcomes are available, there is a label, prescription happen, then you have real world data. And remember, Roche acquired Flatiron Health. And then you can do analysis on these data and then feed back to the R&D. And this has allowed Roche to be able to take real world evidence and feed it into the R&D and come back with a new hypothesis that you could test in research. One of the most remarkable output of this exercise was to be able to do a synthetic control trial on Alecensa, which is against ALK positive lung cancer. And through this synthetic trial, so no patient, just using what was available in competitors, in the real world data, they were able to get an approval for frontline in EMA, which probably made a huge difference and saved lives of many patients. And that was also through the data. Roche focused after that on very targeted cancer, and here you have entrectinib, which is an NTRK inhibitor, which was also acquired through the help of Foundation Medicine to really understand this patient population and get an approval across different tumors. And for 1.7 billion, Roche was able to acquire this targeted therapy. So the difference that data can do in the field of cancer, and tomorrow in the field of other diseases as well, being in immunology, and hopefully neuroscience, is just fueling the progress in R&D. So now when you are in a private equity or a VC, you go through the same process when you acquire a company, but you're a very small team. When you do a deal in a large company, you have, 50 or 100 people, maybe more if it's a large deal. That you can lean on, and in your partnering team you have maybe 20, 30, 50, 80 people. In our fund we are a handful, we are 4 partners and 5 associates, and we are managing 12 companies, and we are in charge of 2 billion. So when we have to do due diligence, it's us. The data are as important, but you have this time we have much less data to look at because it's a smaller company. We are not able to compare this with internal data because most of the time what we're looking at, we don't have the equivalent inside the company. And I would say the financials become even more important because we're not feeding a pipeline. We have to get return. We have to think about the exit strategy. There has to be a very strong equity story that makes sense to our investor. And we have to think about how it all fits into our fund. And the process for decision has to be even more rigorous, which I would say is harder when you're a smaller team because at times you have maybe less check and balance. And that's what we are very careful about when we do deals in this fund. So I'm still new, it's only 2 years. I had a chance to do a few exciting things, but I can see that, I would say there is less oxygen than in a larger company. And talking about deals, I have, this is what I have been able to do in the past couple of years. First of all, licensing in a new ADHD medicine. So attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. I just thought it was interesting to remind ourselves that even though in many countries we feel it's not really a disease, there is a medical publication that shows the impact that this disease can have not only on schoolwork but also on the ability to stay in society as a member that contributes and respects the laws. And so it is a quite a disturbing condition when people are suffering from it. So this is one drug that is currently in development. And then the other one is a Series A in HPV-related head and neck cancer, which is quite a common cancer. And actually it has the number of HPV-related head and neck cancer has passed cervical cancer this year for the first time. So we are talking about, it's still a small percentage of people who have it, but it's actually a cancer you can take care of very well, as opposed to the head and neck cancer that is not HPV related. So there is a real importance to be able to identify this cancer and identify early recurrence. So even if we're talking about a few thousands of patients every year. So very exciting opportunities. In our fund, we get to be chairman of the companies we're in charge of. So I'm chairman of a number of companies, and I enjoy going back into operations, but also doing deals. So happy to talk about this as well. So this is the team between our CEO, our fearless leader, Chris Wiebacker, and my colleagues, partner, and the team of associates. And we try as much as possible to have fun along the way, despite the intensity of the job and the daring times with our virus. Thank you very much. I hope that was worthwhile your time, and I look forward to the conversation.
Thank you very much, Sophie, for this very insightful presentation. So I think the floor is open for questions, and I will actually manage the question in a FIFO way, first in, first out. So the first question, okay, since data is important, do you see whether there is interest to invest in EMR company with millions of data?
Well, I have spent an enormous amount of time looking at data. And actually, Flatiron Health is, to begin with, an EMR company in cancer that put another layer on it to be able to have the diagnostic really flushed out. No, we're not going to be in this field. You can access the data easily, and there is no real economic value for us to be involved in that. We actually own clinics. Maybe you guys know that. We own Crossover Health, which is physical and digital clinics that are serving large customers. So that is really interesting because virtual care is exploding. I don't need to say that. So that's the part of things that we would be interested, but not just EMR.
Okay. Another question, Sophie, is your suggestions for someone with 10, 15 pharma clinical development years and MBA in the VC and deal space?
Oh yes, we are always looking in our companies for chief medical officers, for people who have this experience. I think that this is very helpful. I am learning myself how to best interface with the FDA. So I think this is a really good experience.
Another question is, how do you believe the fallout from Theranos has affected the health and the pharma VC, the health and pharma VC PE space going forward?
No impact. It just reminds you that some people are just investing without looking in what they invest. I mean, this is just that anybody could, give money without looking at what was really going on is quite shocking. So I think it makes no difference. But I think the reality is that a lot of people are investing because they like people and the people look like they really know what they're doing. And I would recommend don't like or believe anything you see, just go and check. That's what I would do.
Another question is, has COVID-19 fighting made sufficient FDA changes so that processes are sped up, which may lead to stronger, faster throughput for drug discovery and marketplace?
Yeah. I think there was already a lot of acceleration at the FDA. Today you can file with a set of data and continue enriching your file along the way. In oncology, you can do a pan-tumor clinical trial, pan-tumor approval. And I think with COVID, we've seen even to the point of it being a little bit risky because they had to remind people there has to be a decrease of 50% of contagion with a virus or with a vaccine. Otherwise, then what's the point? I think there has been a lot of effort in the FDA, and I think it will continue to be the case to make drugs and vaccine available faster.
Thanks, Sophie. Another question is, it would be helpful to understand the framework you use to determine if the deal should be licensing or sell.
or acquisition, right?
Acquisition, yeah.
Yeah, so it's really simple. Never, ever buy what you can license. Never. Because, of course, if you license, then it's backloaded and you'll pay only if something happens. And I think it's two-thirds of the earnouts never are paid eventually. I think there is some data showing that because things never happen on time or not exactly the way they should have been. You have to buy only if owning the technology will serve you across the rest of your pipeline, not only by the thing you're going to buy. For example, Roche bought Foundation Medicine because we had to work hand in hand on everything, on all our R&D. And if you have firewalls on everything, then you cannot operate. So that would be a reason for buying. Then when you have a single asset company, you have no choice. You have to buy if you want access to it. But in general, don't buy if you can avoid, even though an M&A is always getting people excited.
Another question is partnerships between pharma companies and biotech exist for several years. With COVID-19 pandemics, partnerships between several pharma companies decided to work together. Do you think pharma companies are ready to continue in this way?
Yeah, there was just an announcement on antibiotics. I think a large pharma did a consortium, which is great because we cannot get anybody motivated on antibiotics because the business model is not there. So I think that's a really good sign. I wish pharma companies would team up to work on Alzheimer and dementia, because clearly none of them is able to figure this one out. So I think you have to, I mean, how you define what is proprietary, what will be common knowledge has to be really well worked through, but I think this is really necessary.
Thanks, Sophie. Another one is, what are the investment trends in biotech you see for the upcoming years? Do you think the launch of the medication will be postponed because of COVID?
Yeah. So first of all, it's a trend in the biotech. So it's oncology is still the darling. Neuroscience is the darling. Platforms is really important. You know, the dream is a platform with a couple of late stage products. If that's what you can have in your company, you're really putting yourself in a good position. So launch, it's interesting because my company Neveris, who has this cancer detection for HPV positive head and neck, we're launching now. And so we started launching the day the pandemic started, pretty much. So it's been really, so we have a very experienced salesperson and she's done everything through Zoom. And we had to find out how to get the blood of the patient so that we could do the diagnostic, but it's been really helpful. And now we have agreed with the CEO that you know, we have to ramp up the effort, commercial effort. So it is challenging. What we are hearing from a lot of consultants and pharma company is that people are starting to go out again to offices, but it is clear that a beginner sales rep or a product launched that is not truly making a difference is going to be very challenged. What we're also hearing is that there may be a longer impact, which would be a sense of going more for medical liaison type of jobs where, you know, there is more of a dialogue and a symposium type of conversation as opposed to the rep coming in the office. So it could be quite impactful, actually. I think in terms of late stage deals, a lot of companies are going to be very careful in the coming few months, because the last thing you want, I think, is to, you know, recruit people, prepare your launch September 1st, everybody out, October 1st, everybody home. You can only imagine. So I think if you're about to launch, either you launch tomorrow and then you make sure people have, you know, enough of a relationship built that they can continue in the pandemic, or you really think it through.
Thanks, Sophie. Another question is, can you please share with us your point of view on the impact of how handle artificial intelligence technology used on biotech companies versus more conventional clinical data in the deal processes? Do you consider the use of artificial intelligence as a plus in the deal claims, or for you, clinical and bio data stay the gold standard?
Well, it all depends if AI is showing me something, or there is written AI powered company. Okay, great. And then what does it give you? I think that AI, we know, is a black box, because the algorithm, you know, are not going to be transparent. I like very much the idea of applying AI to certain technology. For example, imaging of the eye. If you have an AI ability to look, I think you catch 8 times more information than a physician would. So if a company is proposing you something that, and then they have the data before, after, and you're able to see, I can get excited. I don't get excited about people telling me through AI they will change the face of the earth. Even though I think eventually through AI, the face of the earth will be somewhat changed.
Okay, another question. What did COVID change in your day-to-day basis? What is the role of social responsibility when you are doing company valuation? And what do you think about gene therapy? Sorry, it's 3 questions in a row.
COVID in my everyday life, clinical trials are delayed, or if they are not, they could be. So I'm really paying attention to that. As I told you earlier, commercial activity is different. Then finally, people are personally impacted. Some people are taking it really well. Some people are really stressed. Some people have reasons to be stressed. I mean, everybody has a reason to be stressed, don't get me wrong, but some really should be very careful. So I think that we have to show extreme flexibility in the interaction with people and, you know, be normal human and generous with our time and our ability to be flexible.
Regarding
social responsibility, I think that it's extremely important to have companies with a mission and with people that walk the talk. I have to say, you know, there is a lot of discussion around diversity and inclusion and, you know, people from all origin, orientation, and men, women, and all of that. I think it matters. I have to say that when I meet a company and on the website, they all look alike and they don't even have considered that one woman could be helpful. I had that recently in the case of a fertility company, you can only imagine. Then I would really be extremely careful. So it is important that the company has a mission, but on the other hand, it is also important that the company is focused on what it's supposed to be delivering. Now, gene therapy, there was unfortunately a really sad event with a dentist recently with patient dying in gene therapy. I was really involved in the Spark deal for Roche, so I'm a big fan of gene therapy. I think it will happen for real for a lot of diseases. It will make a lot of sense. But even though commercially it's very challenging, and even though the patent estate is extremely promiscuous, so it is probably a question of next generation and follow-on generation. So it's not a everyday reality for a lot of diseases, but I think in 20 years, it will be something we will see more commonly applied to diseases that are not only spinal muscular atrophy, for example.
Another question is, what are possible exit strategies for in-licensed medicines?
Well, the same as portfolio medicine. A portfolio, like you will sell them or you will spin them off, or, you know, all of the above, or you'll fold them in another company. So it doesn't change anything. If you in-license a drug, unless you have a bad contract that prevents you from doing any of the above, and in that case, you're not doing so well.
There's another question on AI. So are you interested in AI space for healthcare? I think you answered this question. Are you more interested in drugs on genomics?
Well, I'm really interested in targeted drugs. If there is genomics that can tell me that the drug is going to work for a specific patient population, I get really excited, because then I know, and I know it's going to work. And I'm excited about AI helping us understand the mechanism of action of drugs and the likelihood of the drugs to work.
So another question is, what pieces of advice will you give to someone in pharma willing to make a career move into private equity venture capital?
Just really make sure you're really good at something before you go somewhere. Because you really should be able to be part of a team where your experience is added value to the team. In PE, you have very smart financial people, very smart biotech experienced deal makers. You have a very experienced drug developer. So you have a bit of everything, and you want to know what you bring to the table. You should also really ask yourself why you want to do that move, because it's when we are in a big pharma, we forget how great it is to be surrounded by fantastic experts that you can team up without the pressure of return or exits, or just, you know, we're there trying to do the best with the pipeline, and it's stressful and intense and all of that. But it is not every day that you have to think what would be the exit and how soon will it come. So just make sure you understand what is behind your choice, and work hard to have this, you know, competitive differentiation.
Another question is, what is your horizon time period for investment, given R&D can take years to become fruitful? Do you buy preclinical companies and sell by the phase 2 when data comes?
So we have everything in the fund. We have a company called Boston Pharma, which buys preclinical or clinical, it depends, early clinical, that will sell at proof of concept, or for rare disease, maybe they will go all the way to approval. That's one of our companies. We have created 2 companies. I am chairman of one of them that is doing a food allergy treatment with a drug that is made of 15 protein. And this one we are going into a phase 1/2 shortly. So it is a really early stage, and the idea is to probably go for an IPO later on, or maybe a large strategic partnership. And then others we've acquired at the time of pre-NDA filing. And these ones, then we will get commercial. I would say the investment horizon is between, I don't know, 3 to 7 years, something, you know, something like this. And it's really tailored to the future of the company.
Okay. Another question is, can you expand about the relationship between the fund and the existing team, which is the pre-investment team in companies you invest in? Are there any challenges stemming from the different interests, especially when companies later consider collaborating with other pharmaceutical or biotechs?
Yeah, so it's quite simple. We own the companies, most of them, except Naveris, which my company for head and neck. So our objectives are aligned, and even with Naveris, I have to say, otherwise we wouldn't have done the deal. Objectives are aligned, and we would welcome them partnering and, you know, buy new product. And actually the ADHD product I acquired it for Corium, which is a patch company that has an Alzheimer product in development. So we are excited about our companies growing and being very successful. What I think is the challenge is the relationship between the fund and the management team, because the management team feels like they're in charge, and they are wondering why the investor has to be so present, and the investor has a belief that his opinion is or her opinion is really important. So there is this new type of tension I'm discovering, which is quite interesting.
Thank you, Sophie. Given the time and level of investment needed to conduct standard clinical trials today, is your fund considering investment in biotechs that are leveraging artificial intelligence to accelerate the drug discovery?
We try to avoid the early stage, except in Boston Pharma, early stage investment. But I would say it's not a matter of AI or not AI. I think if one of you has a specific question, you guys can always email me and I can give you feedback. The question is the reason to believe that this, whatever you're working on, is going to be actually successful in the clinic and differentiated.
Do you think that investors prefer technology platform or rather products derived from them?
Well, investors love platform because the platform is a promise of more product, but you also want a late stage asset. Otherwise, the platform remains a theoretical opportunity.
Which area are you the most excited in oncology, immunology?
I like precision medicine because I know that the effect size can be massive. I am dreaming of, addressing mutations that are happening, and as well as with the first generation of precision medicine drug, as well as those tumors that are cold, as we call it, so where, checkpoint inhibitors are not having an effect, and if you could just warm them up, that would be just fantastic. I have a big passion for neuroscience. In Roche, we could only do transformational mechanism of action that would change the path of the disease, which was great. We had deals in Parkinson, in Huntington, in SMA, as I said, in Duchenne muscular dystrophy. So we did a lot. Today, I can also do deals on more symptomatic that are not as sexy, but when you think about patients with multiple sclerosis, the symptoms are real. Parkinson, the symptoms are incredibly real, and even if you fix the disease, many symptoms do stay because you cannot really reverse the course, and that I am quite excited about.
What is the biggest difference between large multinational CFO job and private equity CFO? Looking back, how would you prepare yourself to this shift better?
Well, I never was a CFO of a large pharma, of a small of a private equity. I think private equity is all about exit and cash. In Roche, I don't remember Alan Hipper being really freaked out about the cash. We looked at, we raised some debt sometimes, but it was not, what you want is you think about how you're going to pay dividend, how you're going to meet guidance. I mean, the obsession in a company is meeting guidance and a smart way of allocating money to R&D. So how can you keep your budget in R&D steady? How can you meet the guidance? And then how can you still have, innovation being fueled, older things still be sustained, but not overinvested. So this is keeping the company in balance for a future. When you're in a PE, it's very simple. How do I pay the bill of the companies? Now things derail because they always derail. How do you fund them? Where do you raise? Do you take debt? Or do you do convertible? Are you going to put more equity? Are you going to close the company because it's not going where it should? So that is the type of conversation. So it is a lot more hands-on and a lot more concrete. And then you look at the much smaller numbers. Even if I'm talking about 2 billion, you're way above that in a company like Roche.
It always seems that VC want startups to de-risk more and bring more data before they invest. What actually convinced the VC to take a risk, and is price and valuation playing a significant role in that decision?
No, I think I was quoted recently saying that it's not because it's cheap that you should be doing a deal. Yes, you want, I think it's all about reason to believe. The company comes up and says, we're able to target ERK, ERK mutation. So show me why. And then oftentimes the people are not really showing much. And I think so at least have a piece of data, not in the mouse, because the mouse are amazingly, mouse survive cancer nowadays. They always have, actually. So you have to have compelling data and you have to have great scientists. I'm getting questions too. I don't know if you're getting my questions or I'm getting also 19 other questions that are coming directly to me. But one person asked me, with a small team, how do you assess good science? I'll tell you guys, it's really difficult. That's why we try to not do too much of a great science, but we try in my fund to do things that are a bit, more obvious because we understand the pathway or we understand the patient population in a better way because maybe we're not first in this area, but there's still room for us. The way to assess good science is to have great scientists next to you. They don't have to be your employee, but if you have great people that help you assess, it will be enormous. And then I would say, but it's not enough. You have to have a very, very thorough process of decision making. Because if you put 5 great scientists in a room and you walk them through data, If it's fundamental science, that's easy because you're going to really, not easy, but you're going to hear if it's real good or bad. But if you talk about clinical data, you may end up with the lowest common denominator, which prevents you from making a decision. So my recommendation is to talk with advisors separately and then step back, and you have to take the decision and the responsibility. You cannot delegate this to other people.
An interesting question. Why are there still comparatively few European VCs compared to the US?
Because valuations are depressing. I'll tell you, European companies are cheap, but on the other hand, so you can't really make great multiples, you know. And secondly, oftentimes I have found companies giving up major rights in order to fund whatever, or taking major shortcuts because they were short of cash and trying to stay, you know, the anxiety of being diluted. So it is, you know, this is not, I think this is not a great, you know, very uplifting situation. I would recommend when a European company is looking for investor, don't hesitate to go ex-Europe. You know, I mean, the UK is certainly a place where I think it starts to be has accelerated, but the US, you know, there is money available.
With the growing intensity of government's pressure to lower healthcare costs, is there the role for biotech pharma investors to push in this direction?
Like push down the cost of medicine?
Yeah.
I mean, the reality is that nobody is trying to overprice drugs in our industry. I mean, every now and then it happens, but most of the time you really go through a lot of analysis to find the right price. I think if the price of oncology drug was not what it is today, I think it would have been very difficult to develop what has been available. Remember, not long ago, the Tough study showed that it takes 2.8 billion to develop a drug if you take into account the cost of failure. I think actually AI will bring this down because maybe there is stuff we can do differently and the trials are going to be more nimble. But I would be very careful on the crusade of cheap medicine available for everyone. I think there is a few people who are walking around saying that this is their vision and their mission. You know, what I want is medicine that is fair value for patients, that makes sense for the system, that is available to patients, that pharma can actually cover the cost of patients who cannot cover. And you have to know, in the US, it's impossible to fund a patient. Even if you want, there is a system will block you for through some regulation. So a good balance, a good dialogue. I think what we have in France, which is really tough, is actually not so bad, where you are actually able to negotiate with the government, and depending on the quality of your data, your price will be at a different level. So again, I think the dialogue between industry and decision maker is the best way forward.
Another one is, what is your preferred exit strategy as private equity? IPO or sell to big pharma?
Oh, I always prefer to sell if I can.
Can you please explain what motivates you to get into private equity from the pharma industry?
I just wanted to learn something new. So I had a dream job. I really did, with a dream environment, I have to say, and I've enjoyed every minute at Roche, but also at Merck and in all the companies. But I felt that I was getting, you know, at the latter part of my career, and I wanted to still learn things. And I hesitated between a number of options, and I thought PE was going to be a stretch, and it surely was. So I'm not sorry I did it. It's been just really, really interesting.
What are the key skill sets that you are looking for in a person who is transitioning from R&D in medtech, biotech to private equity?
You really have to understand the business. R&D alone isn't going to be sufficient. You know, what makes a company valuable, what makes a company lose its value, what is a competitive landscape of the technology. So, be able to truly understand that, because at the end of the day, it's going to be a lot more financial than you've seen before.
In neuroscience, Roche has lots of drugs under development for Alzheimer's and Parkinson's. Which agent are you most excited for Alzheimer's disease, given so many failures, anti-amyloid beta agent?
Yeah, no, I'm very cautious with amyloid products. I'm the most excited about the Huntington product that we in-licensed from Ionis. It's actually have shown impressive results. I mean, I haven't followed recently, so God knows what will be published tomorrow. But back then we saw we had a real impact on some key symptoms of the patients. There is also a drug in the pipeline against autism. So I don't know what has happened with it, but the early data was really impressive as well.
Success of a deal depends on underlying science. With a small team, how do you assess that?
Yeah, I think I answered. So I said, take experts, but make decisions.
Yep. What financial metric do you use for VC investing in biotech? Price to sell, 3 times, 4 times?
Well, we look at the IRR and the MOIC. Yes, 3-4x is a minimum. You would want to go much higher than that. But then on average, we're not there yet because we haven't had any exit, but we like to think big is better. And sometimes you have to hang on to something until it actually pays off.
And Sophie, I think this is the last question. Looking back to your career, which deal you made or participated in that was a great experience, or should say the best experience for you, and in what aspects?
Oh, there's 2 deals that I really, I liked every deal. They're a little bit like your babies, but I really enjoyed the acquisition of Foundation Medicine, because here is a next-gen sequencing company, and Roche is looking at it like, as we say in French, a hen looking at a pair of scissors, like, oh my God, we need this, but how are we going to assess that? And I developed the model with my team on looking at how it will, first of all, bring revenue itself through the deals with Pharma, through the sale it's making of its test, but also how it will feed R&D, impacting the probability of technical success, the quality of the trial, the number of drugs coming out. So it was a pretty complex model, and I just liked, because I just had to come up with an idea and work with the teams, and this was just great fun. And then the other one is the acquisition of Ignita, the company I just showed you earlier, because everybody was busy doing another deal, and I ended up doing most of it all by myself with my team. And I got the price right, and we could agree very fast with the CEO. So this was just really enjoyable. I have to say the Neveris deal is a great one, because it's a small company, is launching already. There are a handful of people. They have some very experienced people inside the company, and also some one first-time CEO. So I enjoy being part of the team. So yeah, I always say that the best deal is the last one you did. So, but it's not completely true. But I most of the time have fun.
Thank you very much, Sophie, for answering all those questions. In conclusion, what insight can you give us for the future of the biotech, medtech, health tech industry as a whole? What are I would say, the advice and your vision for the future?
I think smaller companies are fascinating. It's a human adventure as well as a scientific adventure. I would recommend that it's great in both sides of the equation, the big and the small companies. And the funds are yet another story, but the funds, I think, is more of a later career move, unless you are a true financial guru. But then in that case, you may miss some of the nuances in our industry, and I think that would be a bit of a miss. So I think going from large to small is great, because in large companies are incredible schools of excellence and of rigor, and then you create a very strong network that you can always ring up when you have a question. So don't hesitate to go to what you don't know as well. but absolutely choose the people, and choosing the people that you will work with, you have to choose the companies. A companies have A people and B companies have B people. And it's a lot more fun to spend time with A companies. So that would be my advice.
Thank you so much, Sophie. And there's a last question they say, that says, what is a good way to contact you?
My email. So Pierre, you can make it available. Maybe yeah, but guys, I'm really swamped now for the next month. I'm under the water. I just want you guys all know. So I tend to answer to everybody, but you may have to be patient.
Thank you so much, Sophie, for this great webinars. And I would like also to thank all the participants. And I think it was a fantastic webinar. And this webinar has been recorded, so you will receive the address to see it again. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Pierre. Thank you guys for taking the time and your great questions. Have a good rest of the day. Stay safe. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Salut Pierre. Merci.
Salut Sophie. Ciao.